Good morning, everybody. So today we are going to start the new module. So this is the excretory system. So we are going to see about the anatomical structures which are involved in the excretory system. Okay. So as you know, the excretory system is made up of two kidneys. From the kidney, there is a long tube which comes down, and these are called as ureters. Okay. The ureters, they then join with a bag-like structure which is called as the urinary bladder, and from the urinary bladder the urine is let out by means of urethra. So all these structures, they form the part of the excretory system or the urinary system. There are other excretory organs like the skin, but we are not going to discuss about that. We are going to discuss only about the urinary system today. Okay, the first one, the kidneys. Now, where are the kidneys located? The kidneys are located in the posterior abdominal wall. In the posterior part of the abdomen, they are located, and they are situated behind the peritoneum. Okay, they are situated behind the peritoneum, and that's why they are called as retroperitoneal structures. Okay, retro means behind the peritoneum. Okay. I cannot see your chats, so if you have any doubts, unmute your mic and then let me know. Okay, so then it extends from T12 to L3, that is thoracic vertebra level 12, and to lumbar vertebra 3. Okay, so it extends until from T12 to L3, and if you see, the right kidney is at a lower position than the left kidney. Okay, so that's because the liver is present on the right side, okay, in the right hypochondrial region. So because of the liver, the right sided kidney, okay, it cannot ascend, and they both appear at different levels. The right kidney is at a lower position than the left. Okay, so these are some of the anatomical features of kidney. So the kidney is located in the posterior abdominal wall. It's a retroperitoneal structure extending from T12 to L3. And the right kidney is slightly at a lower position than the left kidney because of the liver. The shape of the kidney is bean-shaped structure, and it is enclosed by means of a fascia which is called as renal fascia. Okay, fascia means like a covering. Okay, so it is covered by means of a fascia which is called as renal fascia. Now the relations. What are the structures which are closely related to kidneys? On the superior, there are some difference in the relationship between the right kidney and the left kidney. So first let's see about the right kidney relations. Okay, so this is the right kidney. On the top, superiorly, there is adrenal gland or suprarenal gland. Okay, the right suprarenal gland is located on the top, and structures which are located anteriorly, since this is the right-sided kidney. Okay, so you can see that most of the place the liver is occupied on the anterior aspect. Okay, the right lobe of the liver, the duodenum, the second part of the duodenum, it comes over here. And from the ascending colon, the transverse colon, there will be a change, right? From the ascending colon, transverse colon. Okay, so that part is called as hepatic flexure. The place where the ascending colon changes into transverse colon, it's called as hepatic flexure of the colon. Okay, hepatic flexure because it is close to the liver. Okay, so you know that the ascending colon will be coming up, and from here it changes into transverse colon. The place where the ascending colon changes into transverse colon is called the hepatic flexure. Okay, So these are the structures which are located anteriorly: the liver, duodenum, and the colon, the hepatic flexure of the colon. All right. So these are the structures which are located anterior to the right kidney. Posteriorly there is diaphragm and posterior abdominal wall muscles. Okay, posteriorly there is diaphragm and posterior abdominal wall muscles. Now let's see the left kidney. The left kidney, so here you can see the left kidney, and also you can appreciate that the right kidney is at a lower position than the left. The left kidney, superiorly, there is again a gland which is the left suprarenal gland or the left adrenal gland. Okay, the other structures which are present, you can use this same picture here. Okay, so here you can see the left sided kidney. On the anterior part there is stomach. You know, the esophagus comes here and this will be the stomach. Okay, so there is stomach. Pancreas will be present. Now you know the duodenum. After duodenum comes the jejunum. Okay, so jejunum. Okay, and the transverse colon changes into descending colon. Okay, the transverse colon changes into descending colon. Okay, so this is called a splenic flexure. Okay, so stomach, spleen, pancreas, jejunum, and splenic flexure of the colon. So these are the structures which are located anterior to the left kidney. Stomach, I'll show you with the picture. Stomach, pancreas, jejunum, splenic flexure, and the spleen. Okay, whereas in the right only three parts: liver, duodenum, and the hepatic flexure. Here stomach, pancreas, jejunum, splenic flexure, and the spleen. Okay, so these are the structures located anterior to the left kidney. Okay, and posteriorly there is diaphragm and posterior abdominal wall muscles. Okay, posterior abdominal wall muscles, same as that of right kidney. Diaphragm and posterior abdominal wall muscles. Here also it is diaphragm and posterior abdominal wall muscles. Okay, so these are the relations of the kidney. Any doubts until now? All right, now let's see what is located inside the kidney. Inside the kidney, there is an outer structure which is called as cortex and an inner structure which is called as medulla. So outer cortex and inner medulla. The medulla is made up of these primary structures: pyramids, minor calyx, and major calyx. And from the medulla, there will be a collection of tube which is called as renal pelvis. So all the tubules will be joined to form the renal pelvis. I'll be showing you a picture here. Yes. So here you can see the outermost part. This is the cortex. Okay, so this is the renal cortex, and the part which is present in the center, that's called as medulla, renal medulla. So the outer part is renal cortex and the center part is renal medulla. Okay, now in the renal medulla, if you see, there are some pyramid shaped structures, this dark brown or reddish brown color. So these are called as renal pyramids. Okay, you can see number one, which is the renal pyramid. Okay, the renal pyramid. Okay, now this is the place where the urine is formed. Okay, so the blood vessels, they enter through the renal cortex. Okay, and they are filtered through these renal pyramids because there are some certain structures which are called as nephrons. Okay, the nephron, which is the unit of kidney. Okay, so these nephrons, they will filter the blood and take the toxic material. Okay, so the substances which are not required by the human body, so they are excreted through these renal pyramids. Okay, so the base of the renal pyramid is near the cortex and the apex is near the medulla. Okay, so this is the apex of the renal the pyramid. Now from the apex of the renal pyramid, there comes a tube. So the urine is led through the apex of the renal pyramid into a tube. Number 8. What is this number 8? Minor calyx. Okay. So minor calyx. So all these are minor calyx. Okay. Now 2 or 3 minor calyces, they join together to form number 15, which is the major calyx. Okay. So from the renal pyramid, the urine goes into the minor calyx, then major calyx. Okay. All the major calyces, they will join together and finally they open into a single tubular system which is called as renal pelvis. Okay, which is called as renal pelvis. Okay, and from the renal pelvis, it goes down through a tube number 7, which is the ureter. Okay, through the ureter. Okay, so once again, I will tell you the outermost structure is called as renal cortex. Okay, the inner structures, they are called as medulla. In the medulla, there is renal pyramid. There is renal pyramid. From the apex of the renal pyramid, okay, it opens into the minor calyx, then into the major calyx, then into the renal pelvis, and then finally into the ureter. Okay, any doubts? This is very important, and then you need to know these structures. Okay, it will be nice if you know all these structures, okay, but at least the ones which are highlighted here, that is, which are written in bold letters: the renal pyramid, the renal artery, the renal vein, okay, the renal hilum, okay, the renal pelvis, ureter, renal capsule, minor calyx, major calyx, renal sinus, okay, renal papilla, and renal column. At least these ones you need to remember. Okay. Any doubts until now?
No, doctor.
Okay. So now I told you the cortex, medulla, minor calyx, major calyx, renal pelvis, ureter. All right. Now let us see what are these ones. The renal column. What is the renal column? Number 17. Okay, you just have a look into this. See, the number 17 is pointing here. Okay, so what is this part? You can see the cortex is going in between the renal pyramids. Okay, the cortex is going in between the renal pyramids, and this is called as renal columns. Okay, so this is referred to as renal columns. Okay, so renal column is nothing but the extension of the cortex between the pyramids. Okay, and renal papilla. What is the renal papilla? Number 16. Here you can see the apex of the renal pyramid. Okay, the apex of the renal pyramid is referred to as renal papilla. Okay, the apex of the renal pyramid is called as renal papilla. Okay, number 15, you already know that's the major calyx. Number 14, what is this renal sinus? The renal sinus is a space which is located in the kidney where the renal pelvis is found. Okay, suppose if we remove this renal pelvis, there will be a space, right? So that space is called as renal sinus. It's called as renal sinus. Now, what is this renal cortex for? What is present in the renal cortex? There are very tiny structures which are called as nephrons. Okay, the nephrons. Okay, the detail about the nephron, how the urine is formed from the blood, the kidney. Okay, so that will be dealt in your next semester. Okay, by Dr. John. Okay, in physiology. Okay, so that will be taught separately. Okay, but right now you need to know these structures. Okay, renal capsule, it's nothing but the outermost layer. Okay, the outermost layer. Okay, then the renal pelvis, already you know. Renal hilum. Okay, the hilum, what is the meaning of hilum? All these three structures, renal artery, renal vein, and the ureter, all these three structures are together referred to as renal hilum. Okay, the place where they enter into the kidney. Okay, the place where they enter into the kidney, so that's referred to as renal hilum. Okay, so basically you need to go through all these parts in the kidney. The renal cortex, medulla. In the medulla there is pyramid. The apex of the pyramid is called as renal papilla. The renal papilla opens into the minor calyx. From the minor calyx it goes into the major calyx. From major calyx into the renal pelvis, and from the renal pelvis into the ureter. Between the pyramids there is renal columns. Okay, any doubts? All right, the next one, the blood supply of the kidney. The blood supply of the kidney is by two main arteries, right and left renal artery. Okay, so here in this picture you can see this behind this is aorta. Behind the aorta you can see an artery which goes and supplies the kidney. So that is the right and left renal arteries. Okay, now where does this renal artery arise from? It is arising from the abdominal aorta. Okay, so here you can see, okay, aorta, abdominal aorta, and this is the right renal artery, and this is the left renal artery. Okay, the right and left renal arteries. Okay, the veins. The veins, there are once again right and left renal veins. Okay, the right and left renal veins, they drain into the inferior vena cava. Okay, now here in this picture you can see the inferior vena cava. Okay, and this is the right renal vein and this is the left renal vein. You can see both of them are draining blood into the inferior vena cava. Okay, it is draining into the inferior vena cava. All right, then the left renal vein is longer than the right. Okay, so here you can see the left renal vein is longer than the right. Okay, now why is it like that? Can anyone tell me, like, why the left renal vein is longer than the right renal vein? Okay, I'll tell you the answer. Because the inferior vena cava, is more towards the right. It's not in the center of the body. Okay, it's not in the center of the body. It is more towards the right side. Okay, so the right renal vein is actually short compared to the left renal vein. Okay, compared to the left renal vein, the right renal vein is shorter. Okay, any doubts until now? All right, Let's go to the next one, which is the ureter. Okay, the ureter, from the pelvis, renal pelvis, the ureter is formed. The ureter, look at the spelling, ureter, it's a tube which conveys the urine from the kidney to the urinary bladder. It is approximately 25 to 30 centimeters. It is also located behind the peritoneum and extends until the pelvic cavity, and it passes into the urinary bladder, not straight. It passes through the posterior wall of the bladder. Okay, that is, it passes for a certain time within the wall of the urinary bladder. Okay, now why is it passing through like that? In order to prevent the reflex of urine. Okay, so here you can see the kidney, the ureter. It is extending from the kidneys and it opens into the urinary bladder. Okay, the place where it opens into the urinary bladder, it passes through the wall of the urinary bladder. Okay, it passes through the wall of the urinary bladder and then it opens into the urinary bladder. How does it prevent the reflex? Reflex, like it is going the opposite direction. Okay, so the urine has to go always in one direction. Okay, so what happens if the urinary bladder contracts? The urine should flow only to the urethra. Okay, it should not go back into the ureter. Okay, so how is that prevented? That's because the ureter passes through the urinary bladder. Okay, so when the urinary bladder is contracting, the ureter is closed, preventing reflex of urine. Okay, once again I'm telling you, the ureter passes through the wall of the urinary bladder. Okay, it passes through the wall of the urinary bladder, and when the urinary bladder contracts, the urine flows through the urethra. Okay, it flows only through the urethra. It will not extend into ureter because the ureter passes through the wall of the urinary bladder. Okay, so that is very important. The next one is the urinary bladder. The urinary bladder is roughly pear-shaped structure. Okay, but when it is filled with urine, it becomes oval-shaped. So when it is empty, it is like a pear-shaped. When it is filled with urine, it is oval-shaped. Okay, it is this place where the urine is stored. The posterior surface of the urinary bladder is referred to as the base of the urinary bladder. Okay, so the base is situated near the posterior surface. The urethra is located at the neck and the peritoneum covers only the superior surface of the urinary bladder. So here you can see the urinary bladder. First we will see in male and females. Okay, first we will see in male. In male, the urinary bladder, here you can see, and you can see the ureter is opening into the posterior surface of the urinary bladder. Okay, it is opening into the posterior surface of the urinary bladder. Okay, the posterior surface is also called as the base. So which means that this is the apex. Okay, so this is the base, this is the apex. Okay, and it becomes oval shaped when it is filled with urine or pear shaped when it is empty. From the neck of the urinary bladder, okay, this is the neck of the urinary bladder, the urethra emerges. Okay, so the urethra emerges from near the neck of the urinary bladder. Okay, remember the spelling urethra. Okay, this is different from ureter. Okay, ureter is different from the spelling of ureter, and urethra is different. Urethra is from the urinary bladder to the exterior. It's called as urethra. Okay, whereas the one from the kidney to the urinary bladder, it's called as ureter. Okay. Now, if you see this urinary bladder, anterior to the urinary bladder, there is nothing. Okay, so there is just a pubic bone and anterior abdominal wall. And posterior to the urinary bladder, there is rectum. Okay, there is rectum. Rectum is the place where the stool is stored, right? So where the stool is stored, it's called as rectum. So in males, the urinary bladder is located between this part, which is called as pubic symphysis, and the rectum. Okay, now let's see in female. In females, the urinary bladder is same. The ureter opens into the posterior surface, just like in males. Okay, only thing is the relation. Okay, the urinary bladder, anterior to the urinary bladder, it is pubic symphysis, which is same like that of males. But posterior to the urinary bladder, there is a structure. Okay, so this structure is called as uterus. Okay, the uterus. Okay, and this part is called as the vagina. Okay, so posterior to the urinary bladder, there is uterus and vagina. Okay, and behind this is the rectum. Okay, so urinary bladder, posterior to the urinary bladder, in females, it is uterus and the upper part of the vagina. Whereas in males, posterior surface is by the rectum. Also, another thing, if you note, the urethra is long in males. Urethra. Okay, urethra is the bladder which conveys the urine from the urinary bladder to outside. So this is longer in males, whereas in females, the urethra is short. Okay, in females, the urethra is short. Okay, any doubts until now? Okay, let's go to the next one. The capacity of the bladder. The urinary bladder normally can hold up to 600 ml of bladder. Okay, on an average, okay, up to 600 ml of urine it can hold. Okay, and the awareness to micturate, that is, when does the person know that he has to go to the washroom? So that can vary between 300 to 400 ml. So when the urinary bladder reaches 300 to 400 ml, the person feels like he has to go to the washroom. Okay, that is called as micturition. The act of passing urine is called as micturition. So the awareness to micturate occurs at 300 to 400 ml. Trigone of the urinary bladder. I will tell you this. What is this? Trigone of the urinary bladder. The next one, the internal urethral sphincter and external urethral sphincter. The internal urethral sphincter is involuntary and external urethral sphincter is voluntary. Now we will see this picture. So here you can see the urinary bladder. Okay. Now most of the surface of the urinary bladder is rough, except for this small part in the posterior surface of the urinary bladder, which is triangle in shape. Now this is called as the trigone of the urinary bladder. Okay, so this is called the trigone of the urinary bladder. Now, what are the points for reference for the trigone of the urinary bladder? So here you can see two openings on the top of the trigone of the urinary bladder. Now, what are these openings? Ureteric orifices. Okay, so the ureter opens here. Okay, on the top of the trigone of the urinary bladder. Now, the apex of the trigone, it is formed by the internal urethral meatus or internal urethral opening. Okay, internal urethral opening. That is the place where the urethra is formed. Okay, so here in this case, this part will be the internal urethral meatus or opening, and this part is the external urethral meatus or opening. Meatus means opening. Okay, so internal is located inside where the urethra starts, and external is located outside. Okay, where the urine comes out. Okay, in females, this is the internal urethral meatus, and this is the external urethral meatus. Okay, now this internal urethral opening is protected by means of a sphincter, which is called as internal urethral sphincter. Okay, internal urethral sphincter. Then comes later on, there is another sphincter, and that is called as external urethral sphincter. Okay, internal urethral sphincter and external urethral sphincter. Now, if you see, the internal urethral sphincter is involuntary. Okay, involuntary means it is not under our control. Okay, it cannot be controlled by us. Whereas the external urethral sphincter, it is under our voluntary control. Okay, so that is, it can be controlled by our body. Okay, so we can control when the external urethral sphincter opens. Okay, so what happens when the urinary bladder is full, say around 300 to 400 ml, the internal urethral sphincter relaxes. Automatically, it will relax. Okay, because the urinary bladder is full and this internal urethral sphincter is not under our control. Okay, it will relax. Okay, and this will send the signals to the brain, and the person will come to know, yes, the bladder is full and they have to rush to the washroom. Okay, then what happens once he goes to the bathroom? Until he goes to the bathroom, the external urethral sphincter is contracting. Okay, it is constricting and holding the urine within the urinary bladder. Okay, and once it goes to the washroom, the external urethral sphincter is relaxed, and then the urine flows out. Okay, so internal urethral sphincter is under involuntary control, and the external urethral sphincter is under voluntary control. Okay, any doubts? Do you have any doubts?
No, doctor.
No.
Okay.